Welcome to the Backyard Bounty Podcast from heritageacresmarket.com, where we talk about all things backyard poultry, beekeeping, gardening, sustainable living, and more. And now, here's your host, Nicole.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Backyard Bounty. Today, I'm joined by Meg with Seed to Fork, and today she's here to kind of help us plan our garden and let us know some of the things that we need to do to get started and how to kind of avoid getting too overwhelmed when beginning. So, Meg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me.
So I found you from your amazing Instagram that's filled with all kinds of incredible pictures from your garden. And then, of course, you have your blog. But can you kind of just tell us some more about yourself and your business?
Yeah, well, I am a home gardener. I've been gardening with my husband since the very beginning of our relationship over 20 years ago. And gardening has always been kind of a part of who we are as a couple. And I always say that our garden is really a reflection of our relationship because we work in concert together. And that is our canvas. That is what we're creating together kind of on a landscape level. We started very small with just a half a dozen tomatoes in some 5-gallon buckets. And we did that because we knew we were moving. And then it's just slowly grown. The garden is the wonderful metaphor. It just has grown. Our passion for it's grown. Our knowledge has grown. And we've finally arrived at what I would consider to be as close to our dream garden as possible in this current house. And we've lived here for 3 years.
Oh, wow. That's quick.
Well, we hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I looked at this house, and it wasn't quite the right house, but it had a red barn and it had a wood shop for my husband in the basement. And I knew just a couple of trees needed to be cut, and I had a vision, couldn't get out of my head that I had to actualize. So,
and what part of the U.S. do you live in?
We're in Minnesota. We're just outside the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We moved here from Oregon out of grad school and thought it was going to be like a 3 to 5 year endeavor. That was in 2003. This happens to a lot of people.
Yes.
Warning to anyone who's listening, if you move to Minnesota, you may never leave. It took me probably a decade to embrace it here, and I finally am at a place where it does actually. This is the first house I've lived in that I actually do feel at home.
Oh,
yeah, it's emotional. I mean, I can tell you I've been running like, oh, I want to get back to Oregon. I mean, I miss the oceans, but this was the first place where I'm like, oh, I think I could stay in Minnesota.
That's great.
So, yeah.
And is it challenging to garden there? I imagine with the winters and everything, and I assume it's a pretty short growing season there.
It is. I want to say we have about 155 growing days. I wonder how similar our actual growing days are between you and me, even though you're in Colorado and maybe you're a warmer zone a little bit. I mean, you guys can get stuck with late frosts and things like that. Typically, our frosts are done by the end of April, beginning of May, and we're frost-free May through at least sometime in September. Sometimes our first frost isn't until almost the end of October. It's a very short growing season, but I work on skirting that by having a really strong indoor setup for seed starting. And I also use high tunnels. I push the season by warming my soil as early as possible once the sun's starting to get a little higher in the sky, like in early March. So there's ways around it. I take it as a challenge. Mother Nature has challenged me to make the best of my situation. So
yeah, if it was easy, it wouldn't be as fun.
Or interesting, yeah. I like I don't know. The challenges are what, make people interesting, right? I think the same as with the garden.
So what all do you grow in your garden?
Oh, dear. Well, I did recently count for another friend who asked me if I could total the number of edibles I'm growing. And from seed, annual edibles like herbs, flowers, and vegetables, it was 143 different varieties this year.
Wow.
I mean, that's not like, it's probably like 30 different types of vegetables.
Sure.
And then we've got 15 or 16 fruit trees. We've got apples, peaches, apricots, nectarines, plums, and pears, and a cherry. I love, Rainier cherries, but alas, I don't live in the Northwest. So we're stuck with sour cherries. We've got elderberries, we've got blueberries and strawberries and raspberries. Really, we've been waiting to be able to garden on this grander scale. We intensively garden about 1/8 of an acre. So we knew what we needed. And my husband is the perennial guy. This is how I said we work as a team. He's the perennial guy. So he studied and did the math, like how many blueberry plants do you need to produce, enough blueberries for a year, and 10 asparagus plants per person, apparently, which is way too many, by the way, I would say.
Yeah.
5. So we have and my kids don't even like it. We have 40 asparagus plants in our asparagus bed. Oh, goodness is right. I mean,
I think we have 5.
Yes. So I would have been okay with 20, but now that they're in the ground, and we started those from seed too. And then, it's about 2,000 square feet maybe of actual raised beds for vegetables, annual vegetables. And I continue, every year is different. So I really tried to change my focus a little bit this year. We didn't used to grow a lot of tomatoes, but we're always cooking with tomatoes in winter. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go for the tomatoes this year. That was a big change. I had this aha moment thanks to Instagram last year, like, I could grow my own paprikas and I could grow my own spices. And so that was another shift that I made in our pepper garden. That was a big, big change. And that's been really fun. I mean, to taste fresh paprika, like who gets to do that? That was cool. So little things like that. But yeah, so, we are eating out of the garden by early May, and then we have a root cellar, and we put our potatoes and carrots, beets, and whatever else, Brussels sprouts and leeks and onions and garlic and all of our squash. We put all those up. So I'd say we feed ourselves more than half the year out of our garden. It would be lovely to be year round, but unless I have a greenhouse someday, I don't think that I'm going to quite get there.
Well, that's amazing. And then you mentioned when we were talking before that there's 4 of you in your house.
Yeah, we have 2 sons, school aged, and they were way more excited about the garden before they knew what like video games were.
Oh, that's I
great. Mean, they're older, right? They're going into 5th and 8th grade, and they do enjoy the garden. And if I send them outside, the garden is where they end up, and they hang out there, and they hang out with us. And there are foods. One of my sons would like me to grow just tomatoes, peanuts, and potatoes. That's all he wants me to grow, which is not feasible. And the other one, cucumbers are his thing, and peas, but he doesn't like my garden peas. He likes them frozen.
Oh, really?
Kids are who they are.
Yeah.
I do think that we're having a positive impact on their life.
Oh, yeah.
By them seeing where their food comes from. I'm sure osmosis is working and they're learning something by just hanging out with us. I gotta hope.
That's pretty impressive. Most kids nowadays just want to play on the iPad and don't want to go outside, and they want to eat, their chips or whatever. So the fact that you can grow enough food to feed your family plus get your kids interested, I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I try. Thanks.
So you mentioned that we kind of talked about how it's so easy, especially if you have, hundreds of plants like you do, even if you don't even have that many, it's easy to get overwhelmed when you're planning your garden and wanting to get started. What have you found has worked for you to kind of help keep your anxieties to a minimum? I
think having a good plan, and that requires even stepping back before you garden, really asking yourself I don't know. I like to look at my plate every winter. Like, what are we eating? What do we like to eat? Well, could we grow that? And that's how paprika would be a good example. We use that all the time on rubs, and well, instead of buying it at the co-op in bulk all the time, maybe we can grow it ourselves. So I think, and a good garden takes time. I say this a lot on my Instagram feed because I think in this day and age of Instagram and pretty photos, it's really easy to scroll and think that that's normal to have a garden that looks like that. And I work really hard to have my garden look the way it does. And that garden was a good 20 years in the making. I mean, it's not an overnight endeavor, and I don't think it should be, because I think the reason our garden is so beautiful and rich is that we have just every year kind of like building soil, right? We've added layers to our knowledge and our dreams, and we've adjusted what's important to us, and we've refined what we want to grow and how we grow it, and we've gotten better about starting seeds. And so there's all of these components. It's a complex system, really, especially gardening in this climate where we are, which is a zone 4. We're probably 4A. This past winter, I think we were probably a 3 because it got so cold. So, which is fine, except that we, lost some trees, died back really, really hard. So I would say start small is probably, really, if you want to go all the way back to my roots, it would be houseplants in college is probably where I got my start growing, taking cuttings from friends and throwing them in a glass of water and being like, I also, to be fair, I studied forestry. I studied natural resource management. My husband also studied it for a while in college. He even went so far as to soil judge as an extracurricular. Like we have a lot of academic kind of background that we bring to the garden. And so I think that really rounds us out in a way that makes it feel less overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But once you actually start growing stuff and assuming it does fairly well, then there's a different kind of overwhelm that sets in, right? Like my drawer full, I am not kidding. One of my bins in my refrigerator only has cucumbers in it.
I believe.
Like 4 kinds of cucumbers, and it's full. And there's a local food shelf that apparently doesn't need any more cucumbers. So, I'm working on that. To me feels overwhelming, is growing this food and then not having a mouth to feed. Mm-hmm. And the compost pile is fine. This is where I wish we had animals, because I would have I'd just throw them slice it in half and throw it to the chickens, right? I don't have that luxury right now. So that overwhelm is like a whole nother, and I said to myself this year was going to be the year that I was organized with that. And because of various circumstances, this is sort of my Achilles heel right now. I feel like obligated if there's people that are hungry near me, and I've got food in my yard, mm-hmm. I should be making that bridge. I should be able to build that bridge, but that bridge for me takes time. I'm busy. I'm trying to put food up, I'm trying to take care of kids. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is overwhelm. I think it's an unavoidable aspect of the garden and life. Nature just has a way of growing abundantly, and you just kind of have to go for the ride with her. It's going to happen at some point in the growing season.
Yeah, we have a bumper crop of cucumbers as well, and I'm pretty sure both of our coworkers are just tired of it. And we give the messed up ones to our chickens and stuff. But sometimes food banks won't take home gardening produce, which is such a shame. But yeah, I wish that there was an easier solution to that. You mentioned that you had a root cellar. Do you use any other preservation or food storage systems?
Yeah. So the way we put food up, I love the root cellar because it is like zero processing. It's like, I'm so lazy. If I can take a crop out of the ground and put it in a container and it can sit there for 2 months while I wait until I'm ready, like, hello, I'm all over that. I love sauerkraut and I love kimchi. Mm-hmm. And so we do a fair bit of lacto fermenting, and we were a 0 sugar family for many years. And we've let refined sugar back in our lives, which has opened up just straight up canning, because, with lacto fermenting, there's no table sugar involved. And that's what I love about it. But we have started canning. I've canned salsa this year. My goal was to be able to can enough salsa and tomatoes. The canning the tomatoes is, I'm staring at them over here. I have 6 pints that I've canned.
Oh.
It's tomatoes. It's roasted tomatoes that I drained. I used citric acid. So yes, I do we've made pickles. We've canned pickles. We've lacto fermented pickles. We made sweet relish. We've made some jam. I'm trying to get better about that. The freezer is always an option for my tomatoes, but I kind of like, maybe this is flawed logic, but for me, I like the idea of my food being shelf stable. So actually taking the time to preserve it so that it can sit not in a refrigerator or freezer and not take up the freezer space. Our freezers are, we've got over 60 pounds of strawberries frozen in one of our big freezers downstairs. And then we froze, maybe like 10 pounds of raspberries, the summer raspberries. And we'll hopefully freeze more raspberries this fall, to be determined how good the crop is. But the fall crop tends to be a little stronger. our blueberry. We have 11 blueberry plants. They're not producing enough yet. For blueberries take a few years. I saw your peaches, by the way, but blueberries take a few years to produce. But once they do, I think we should be in good shape. So we're trying. We give a lot of food away. My husband's coworkers, our neighbors, and then I'm trying to connect with some local churches and things like that.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Compost is the other place. I don't feel like too guilty about throwing away, wilted summer squash. Or not throwing it away. I mean, throwing it into my compost bin. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was nutrients that came out of my soil. So by composting it, it's going to go back in a few years. Yeah. I don't know.
I agree.
The stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. It makes us feel better. That's all that matters.
Well, maybe in this case, yes.
So we just had this conversation last night. I believe 13. We originally had 16 or so, because we had a mix of peaches and apples and whatnot. And the weather out here is challenging with the heat and the wind and the drought. And it's just a challenge. So every time an apple tree would die, we would replace it with a peach tree, because the peach trees seem to do really well out here. So we have one apple tree left. And and it gives us some lovely green apples.
This is funny.
But we also have peach borers out here. So that's been... It's always something. But so of our peach trees, only one of them we've been able to harvest. They were the only ones that had turned yet. And the deer and the birds are all getting their fair share. So we will see how much we can harvest on the next batch. But we've had them for about 4 years. And this is the first time. Last year we got like 2 peaches. And we didn't even get to eat them because they didn't grow to any size. But this is the first year that we've actually had fruit, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it all. We got rid of that one basket full, but
you're going to have to do like a peach CSA in the month of August.
Yeah,
a couple of years. I mean, really, like peaches. Yeah, I had 13 peach trees. We have 1 peach tree, and it's probably going to be too much for 2 of us.
Yeah, we didn't expect to get that much fruit. So. Now we know. I love canning, and I'd really like to get a freeze dryer, one of those like Harvest Right kind of freeze dryers and stuff.
I know. I would love one of those freeze dryers too.
Too bad we don't live closer and we could share one.
That'd be amazing.
Yes, I love canning, but it's a challenge, with work and everything, and so we'll see. We'll make sure they go to good use. But
whew.
Yeah,
I'm going to come visit in a few years in August and steal all your peaches.
Please do. We will have plenty to share. I wish I could just mail you some. They're really sweet. They're good and flavorful peaches.
I bet they're delicious.
They are. So, one of the challenges that I have when I do can is, not only getting overwhelmed and stressed out, but what's kind of your suggestions on pacing yourself and being nice to yourself when you are trying to get that much done in such little time?
Well, I sort of take canning over a multi-day process. I have not been dealing with any fruit yet, but tomatoes, for instance, if I am going to do anything with my tomatoes, I start by slow roasting them in the oven, and I'll do that, slice them in half after dinner, turn my oven on, and they'll roast for a couple hours until I smell them and remember. And then I'll drain them and I'll throw them in a glass container in the fridge, and they might sit in the fridge for 2 to 5 days before I get back to them again. And meanwhile, there's another batch of tomatoes. So I'm really trying to, and even I'm trying to refine a canned salsa recipe. I'm trying to get things down to a smaller level. Volumetrically, the recipes that I see for canning are ridiculous. Mm-hmm. They're like, get 50 pounds of tomatoes and, give your blood to, it's just, I want a smaller batch process because I think most of us don't have a large enough garden to do batch sizes that large. I have been doing batch sizes of 10 cups of tomatoes, and they've been drained and roasted and peeled. And then when I actually get to actually sharing that recipe, I'm going to have it be half that size, which is, I think, doable. So this idea of, and with canning, I think the caveat, and you would probably agree, is you need to follow the USDA standards, right? I always make sure my boil times are long enough. I have pH strips, and I check the acidity on my salsa before I can actually jar it up. And boil it. But this is where, this is my first year actually trying to can. I used to just use my freezer, and that's okay too. You know what I mean? Like whatever, something drew me to be like, I'm taking this as a challenge this year. Like, can I can tomatoes? And I'll tell you, it took me a month of pretending like I couldn't do it to actually finally do it. So, if it doesn't resonate with you, let it go. There's going to be tomatoes in the grocery store. I don't know. I'm not one of those, like, you have to be 100% self-sufficient. I live in the modern world. I love my Cuisinart for chopping things that I don't feel like chopping. So I think when you find something that draws you, like if it keeps your attention, that's when you're onto something. So like for me, we eat a lot of salsa. Like I am committed to refining a salsa recipe and have it being safe, shareable, and that I will distribute sometime here before next summer. I keep telling people.
Just don't put so much pressure on yourself. I know I've always done the huge batch things that takes like all day. By the time you're done, you literally just physically hurt, and the kitchen's a mess, and it's a disaster.
Yeah, see, so all of my recipes, because I've been breaking up how I'm doing them, they've not been more than a couple of hours. So it's like, I get the tomatoes ready, and then I throw them in the fridge. And then when I'm ready for the rest of it, then I chop the rest of the veggies, throw the tomatoes in while the water's boiling. It's like less than 2 hours to make salsa when you actually do the canning part. I don't believe in tomato sauce. I don't believe in making tomato sauce because there's recipes. We don't just eat tomato sauce. We eat tomatoes in so many different ways that I don't want just sauce. Mm-hmm. I also love, love, love to dehydrate tomatoes and then grind them into tomato powder.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Which is basically tomato paste without the water. It takes up less space. It tastes better. It's like my favorite thing. So the dehydrator is another great option for your tomatoes.
Yeah, for some reason I hadn't thought about that. I use dehydrator for all kinds of stuff, but I never thought tomatoes. That's a great idea.
Like Sweet Millions or Sun Golds, if you have any of those, you go slice those in half and they're like candy. They're seriously so good. They're like, if you dry them just to the right amount, They taste like sun-dried tomatoes. They're so good.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea.
Highly recommend. Yep.
Definitely. Yeah, I need to figure something out because that's one of my personal frustrations and that we've kind of talked about, but we're really good at giving our vegetables away. I'm not so great at saving them for ourselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so then, we're out of our own supply pretty quick and I like to share, but I also want some for myself.
I've been kind of greedy with my tomatoes this summer. I'm very generous with everything else, but I really am trying to feed our family, right? Like until next summer, if I could, which I don't think I can, but I'm still trying. Yeah. I give a few away, but I really have not given very many big ones away. I haven't given any of my pasters away. I don't think that's selfish, though. I think you have some work to do there, maybe, to kind of accept that, take care of yourself first. Because if you don't take care of yourself, there won't be any of you to share. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
The other challenge is time. Just finding the time to, like I kind of mentioned before, finding the 4 to 6 hours to do some canning or something. And then this is just me making excuses. But we recently, like a couple years ago, switched to a glass top stove, which does not boil water very well. So it makes canning a challenge.
You're also at elevation, right?
Mm-hmm. We're, oh gosh.
8,000?
No, not quite
6,
that.
8?
I'm
okay.
thinking around 6. I don't remember exactly what we are here.
You're on the western side of the Rockies, right?
Yeah, we're pretty close to New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Colorado.
Never been in that part of the country, yeah. Yeah, you could boil it outside on a propane tank. Mm-hmm. Propane, get on that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right now. No, that's, again, a great idea that we have one of those turkey things. So I actually could do that.
My goal someday is to add a kitchen down near our barn, like an outdoor, like a stainless steel, and do like a high, fast boiler down there and just do my canning outside in the garden.
Yeah, that's a great.
It sounds so romantic.
Right? then you find yourself there and covered in
And you're like,
dirt
it's hot,
and-
it's humid, there's mosquitoes. Forget this. What was I thinking?
Right. I'm
It
going
would be
inside.
a disaster. The dehydrator, I think you should consider this. It's really easy because I put some in like 36 hours ago. I'm ignoring them for like another day.
Yeah.
Cherry tomatoes, they take a few days. Slice them in half and forget about them.
I just got done dehydrating some the mushrooms that we got out of the forest,
Nice.
and in fact, my dehydrator is in the sink soaking right now.
See?
So I like it. Good idea.
Yeah. Awesome.
What would you say are your favorite things to grow?
I love growing everything.
Yes.
That's an awful answer, and it's not what you wanted. Okay. What are my favorite things to grow? I'm just going to tell you this season, my favorite things to grow. Okay, well, carrots are always my favorite things to grow because we worked very hard on amending our soil when we moved here. We created a loam where there was a very heavy clay, and we can grow 12-inch carrots, no problem, and they're beautiful. I mean, I just harvested some today. They're just...
I saw.
Oh, I love my carrots. So I love growing carrots. Now, I'm growing a kind of subtropical fruit for the first time here this year that I started from seed in January because I knew it was going to be a slow grower. It's considered an invasive species in places like Hawaii and South Africa. It's called the Cape gooseberry. It's known in Hawaii as the poha or the golden berry. You can sometimes see it in the grocery store. It looks like a ground cherry. Mm-hmm. It is related to, the ground cherry, but it is a Peruvian ground cherry. It is not the American ground cherry or Aunt Molly's or any of those. We have native ground cherries in North America.
Yep.
Which I think is crazy.
I started some this year.
Yeah. So this has like this gorgeous citrus vanilla flavor. It's got more, it's just got this textural thing going on. Like it's just way deeper of a flavor than a ground cherry. That's probably my favorite new thing I'm growing. And I am going to try to overwinter it inside. I'm going to bring a cutting in and I'm going to try to dig up part of a stem and I'm going to try to overwinter it. And let's see. There's 3 favorite things to grow. That's a really hard question. I mean, I love growing everything.
It's like trying to pick a favorite child.
Yes, because, our strawberries are great. Okay. I love growing anything that the monarchs like. I'll say that as my 3rd thing. And that is not just one thing. I have converted about a half an acre to native prairie. It's only in its 2nd year growing, but we are getting some early succession species that I'm letting flower right now. And, being a monarch habitat is as important to me as growing food for my family. I mean, really, truly, because we do get the super generation. We're able to raise them. They're in my garden right now, and they are going to head down to Mexico next month. So I love being a part of that. It really makes my winter feel like it was worth something because not all parts of the country get this monarch migration. And I think it's really special. So I grow lots of milkweed for them. And I grow a special native plant called Meadow Blazing Star, which is their absolute favorite. I mean, they love my zinnias still, but they flock to this in large numbers. I mean, I saw upwards of a dozen on the plant just a little while ago outside. So yeah, it's beautiful.
That's exciting. We get too many monarchs around here that I've seen, but I've been wanting to grow milkweed and I forgot to put it out so that it could overwinter the seeds. So hopefully I can remember this year.
Do it around Christmas or the winter solstice. That's kind of when because then that'll be enough time.
Okay.
It'll be your Christmas present to yourself.
That's
if you celebrate.
Yes.
Or New Year's. I think showy milkweed might be one of the species that you could grow. Well, I don't know the species there's so many. That's the thing is you have to be careful. I'm a real believer in growing what's native to your region is the best thing for the monarchs or for any of the native species. I mean, they know they have a relationship with things that have been growing here for a long time. So
you said you had a half acre for your pollinator garden and then about 1/8 of an acre for your veggies. So is that pretty much everything that you have growing or do you have any other little plots of exciting?
That's mostly it for outside. We've got some citrus on our deck. We've got a lime tree and a kumquat. We've got an avocado that, we started from seed 5 years ago. I don't think it's ever going to produce fruit for us, but it is still alive. Let the record show. And we have a plumeria that we brought back from that same trip to Hawaii. We're slowly starting from seed, like a little bit of a permaculture food forest. Well, I've got elderberries here and there. I think they produced this year for the first time, and they're actually ripening. I don't know people dehydrate the elderberries, and I'm like, can't you just throw them in a pot? They have the water. You're going to add the water back if you dehydrate them first. I don't know. So I got to figure this one out. It's going to be me versus the birds.
Yeah.
We'll be adding things like hazelnuts is another thing we want to add. And my husband wants to add more edible things, just random berries. I can't really tell you what they are, but I'm just, my mind is blank. Like we wanted to do like a version of a cranberry, right? But do, what are they called? Lingonberries, maybe. So, but by and large, that's the majority. We have a lot, most of the rest of our property, all of it has black walnuts on it, which if you know about them, they exude a toxin and make it very difficult for a lot of vegetables to grow, or anything to grow for that matter. That's why we have a lot of walnuts here, because they've done a really nice job of creating a monoculture. So they're beautiful. Squirrels eat them. They're actually delicious if you take the time to open them up, which we haven't done yet. So yeah, that's about it.
Definitely sounds like enough work for several people. It keeps you busy, I'm sure.
It is, yeah. It's a work in progress. I mean, the getting the vegetable garden ready was our number one priority. The first, 6 months, we moved in the middle of summer, and we knew we wanted to garden the following spring. So designing it, getting our head around how we wanted to fence it off, where the fence was going to be, getting someone to do. Anyway, that took, a couple of months. And then getting the soil ready was the other big thing we did that first fall. So,
do you have any suggestions for people when it comes to designing a garden?
Oh, I did just write a blog post about this on my website. Yeah, lots of suggestions. I would say that would take a long time to discuss, but sunny areas are really important. If it could be flat, that's great. We do not have a flat piece of land, but I actually think in hindsight, it adds a lot of character to our garden that maybe you wouldn't get if you were on flat land. You got to think about things like, what are your soils like? Get them tested. How are you going to irrigate? Do you need irrigation? Where's your water source? Do you need a fence? What kind of fence do you want to use? I mean, these are all the things I think about. And then I really think about, how are you going to use the space? How is the space going to talk to your house? Is the space going to talk to your house? Are there other buildings? What kind of equipment do you want to get in there? I'm assuming you need to deer fence it, because, we would not garden out here without a deer fence, especially not food. It's just not, there's no way. There's bucks in like broad daylight out here. It's like they own the place. So yeah, there's a lot to consider. And that, we had already established, this is maybe our fourth garden that we've built. So we kind of knew what we were doing and knew what worked in the past. And so we were able to kind of design it quickly, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like I had enough experience to know, okay, clay soil, we knew how we wanted to amend it. Okay, we knew we weren't going to do raised beds. Yeah, do you want to do raised beds? Do you want to do in-ground beds, right? Another thing is, what about your paths? We chose to keep our grass in place. And so we have green paths. And I think it adds just a beautiful extra element of life. It literally brings in more bees because we have clover growing in our path, but it also just feels more alive. It looks more alive. And we are blessed with summer flooding. So it's still green. So yeah, there's just so many things to think about. I would love to write a book someday.
You should
where
get
I
on
can
it.
Brain dump all of this. Yeah, I'm trying. And I think really being clear about if there are things you want, like your like all of your fruit trees, right? Like we knew that we wanted all of our perennial fruit protected from the deer and the bunnies. And so we made sure that we defined that space first before we defined our space for annual food, like, just annual vegetables. And we sort of worked from the perimeter in, if that makes sense. And we chose kind of the best spots for sunlight. Use sunlight. Don't try to grow anything in the shade is probably my best advice. I see people trying to grow in like I mean, partly sunny, even like 5-6 hours. No way. Like at height of summer for us, our garden probably has 12 hours of sunlight. I mean, that is why I can grow food that looks like it does, because we have sun, a lot of it, that's huge. I mean, to me, I think that's probably the number one mistake people make is they attempt to garden in part shade because it's what they have.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe don't grow food, I don't know. I mean, because you're going to end up hitting that same wall of like your plants aren't going to thrive, and you're going to think it's you, but it's not you. It might be that they don't have enough sun.
Sure.
So I see it happen a lot.
Really?
Yeah, like people like trying to carve a garden out of like the middle of the woods, and I'm like, good luck with that.
Yeah, that would be a challenge. Unless you're growing mushrooms, which, I mean, maybe.
They're delicious, but you need a little bit of variety.
Yeah. Do you do companion planting?
I do, although I don't really call it that. I don't give a lot of credence to like companion planting. I mean, I will say the plants that I do believe help bring in beneficials, I do interplant with, like sweet alyssum, I love. Dill, I think, is fabulous. So plants that have those umbelliferous is, I think, the botanical term, but those wide, flat flower clusters, those are really good for beneficial insects because it's the right flower structure for their mouth parts. I love having marigolds in my garden. They're partly decorative, but I think they do also bring in the beneficials. The monarchs like them, so I like them. I'm following their lead on that one. Yeah, and then I, between our clover and zinnia is another thing that I love interplanting in our garden. I've got some snapdragons in there. And as far as like companion planting vegetables, like I don't believe like, basil does better when it's next to tomatoes. Like I just, no, like, And I mean, there is no science. I don't know if you're a companion planter or not, but I tend to be more of like a scientist. Like there's not a lot of science that backs that up right now, just like there isn't science behind compost tea. There's no science to back that up. If it feels good, do it. Like I plant flowers because they feel good. And I try to choose flowers that generally have a benefit in my garden. And I do believe that having flowers in your vegetable garden is going to help with pest management. I mean, that I'm not going to refute, but like, is something going to grow better because there's a flower next to it or because so no. I mean, we did have the Carrots Love Tomatoes book once, and I don't know where it went because I don't think we ever really read it. Do you know about that book?
I haven't heard of that one.
Companion planting. Okay. It's a companion planting book. But I do. I mean, I interplant cabbages with radishes, and my radishes always do fine. I plant them by themselves, they still do fine. So you know what? Like, I just do what you want to do, I guess, is my point. I really think everyone's garden is their own playbook, and they get to write the rules,
Sure. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong way as long as you make it your own, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And you'll know what works for you by how well your plants do. And that's how you learn. Mm-hmm. And I do think every site is so specific. And so, yeah, I try not to get too bogged down in that kind of stuff. I just enjoy planting. But I do have certain things I like to plant together now, just based on tradition and things like that, So I wouldn't call it a companion planting thing, though.
Do you have any other tips or suggestions or resources for people that are wanting to start gardening?
Well, I think a good gardening book is always a great place to start. We read some fabulous gardening books when we very first gardened back in the day, and they were specific to the parts of the country we were in at the time. So it was like a gardening book for Western Oregon, which is really funny. But Steve Solomon is the man who wrote those books. And I don't know if you know Territorial Seed Company at all, but he started that seed company. They're out of Cottage Grove, Oregon, and we used to buy seeds from them. He no longer lives in the States, but through him, and Elliot Coleman is another fabulous northern gardener that I have a lot of respect for. I mean, the guy's in his 80s now. He's kind of like a legend to us, my husband and I at least. So between like reading their things and all of my experience, I also, about a year and a half ago, launched a gardening blog. I've written other types of blogs, but I do have a bunch of resources on there, articles about succession planting and flower gardening, and I've got some sowing charts. And I do try to use my Instagram feed as sort of a seasonal garden chatting, somewhat advicey, somewhat, I don't know, meandering topics and thoughts. So I think local is great, though, too, for people. I try to make my resources as adaptable as possible to other zones by like putting just, so many weeks from last frost instead of just the dates that I go by. But, your best resource is your own hands and your own garden and time. I mean, I really believe that.
I think those are some really good suggestions. I always recommend that people contact their local extension office too for, questions specific to their area, because even within your state, it can vary so much county to county. And that's also a good source for your soil test kits too.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. If I ever run into an issue, like I had to diagnose anthracnose this year on my tomato plants, which was, it was like a new disease. I've never dealt with this in all my years of gardening as a new disease. It's like, great. But the first place I did go to diagnose that was I went to my university extension's website. I mean, I think they are, and I'm a master gardener in the state of Minnesota. And so I am obliged I'm a volunteer master gardener, but I have a responsibility to make sure that any information that I use is reputable. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to use extension agencies, definitely go local. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't go to the University of Florida to look up information unless it's about like my lime tree or some area. But so yes, I agree with you that extension universities, I think soil testing is huge. I think that's a great first. We did that the first fall we moved here. We had our soil tested. We dug up a bunch of different spots where we wanted to garden.
So, Meg, for those that want to find your amazing Instagram and read your great blog articles, how can they find you?
Sure. I am at Seed2Fork on Instagram. And my website is seed2fork.com or megcowden.com. And that's where you can find all my resources, links to email me. There's links to my YouTube channel, and I have an Amazon shop. It's not very big, but, some gardening books and things that we use around the house, mostly garden related, of course. But so, yeah.
Awesome.
Instagram is a great place. I've got all of my links are dropped right through my Instagram profile. I'd say that's probably the best place to find me.
I am a huge fan of your Instagram page, so I highly recommend anybody that loves gardening definitely check out the Seed2Fork Instagram page. Your pictures are gorgeous, and I love all of the facts and information that you have on there.
I really enjoy doing it. It's a creative outlet for me.
It definitely shows. Well, Meg, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me and to talk gardening.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nicole. It was such a pleasure. It was really nice to meet you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And we'll include the links to all of your information in the description so that anybody that wants to find you, they can go there. And as always, thank you for listening to Backyard Bounty, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Backyard Bounty, a podcast by heritageacresmarket.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you have a question you'd like us to answer on the show, please email us at ask@heritageacresmarket.com. Also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Heritage Acres Market. All of the links mentioned in this podcast will be included in the description. See you again next week.